My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of Rebuild North Bay Foundation. This podcast is specifically designed to bring you people who have been through what maybe you have just gone through or that you are concerned about. We created the podcast How to Disaster to show you the breadth and depth of humanity in the midst of this really terrible thing that happened. I wanted to do this podcast so that I could bring some of the most amazing leaders that I've ever known in my life to you. You may have just experienced a disaster, and you may be looking around and you are dealing with trauma and the shock of it. And you may be wondering, I don't know how to do this part. And so we purposefully made this podcast into different sections and different topics of recovery so that you could pick and choose what would work for you at that time. So welcome to How to Disaster, and thank you for giving us your time.
Hello, everyone. This is Scott Adams. Welcome to this video interview as a follow-up to our recent research paper, Disconnected: Understanding Communication System Failures During Disaster. The project was funded by the Rebuild North Bay Foundation and United Way of the Wine Country, and it's really intended to help bring understanding to this critical issue, to foster a dialogue and to help identify solutions moving forward for individual municipalities and residents here in California. Today we're honored to be speaking with Reva Feldman, the City Manager for the City of Malibu. She has been through a number of disasters herself and was really helpful in our research on this paper. Reva's going to be talking to us about really, how municipalities can go about planning, preparing for disasters, the need to think big for, inevitable future disasters. So Reva, welcome. We're so glad to have you with us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Great. So, in 2018, the Woolsey fire occurred in Malibu, and just really significant as it's indicative of these large-scale disasters that California has faced over the last several decades. Just for the people who are looking at this video, wanted to have you just give a brief description of the setup and what happened and what you found yourself in 2018 during the fires.
Great, thank you so much. So I'm really honored to be able to share some of the experiences that I went through and the City of Malibu went through, and my hope is always that someone will take something away in case they ever are in the same situation and they can learn from it and be better prepared. So the City of Malibu, we call it kind of disaster central. We are known to have wildfires, frequent wildfires, mudslides, storm and high rain, big rain events. And so we prepare for emergencies all the time. We, unlike a lot of small cities, practice our EOC very regularly. My staff is very well versed on that. And we have a lot of robust and redundant communication tools that we use for our community. We send out regular traffic advisories through a variety of programs, which is something unusual for a small city. So my staff is very fluent in doing that and communicating with the city. Prior to the Woolsey fire, I had the opportunity to serve in the EOC in Santa Rosa during the Tubbs fire. And so I was able to get a lot of good experience that I brought back to my city. And so we did things in the year before the Woolsey fire, like doing a test of our reverse 911 system, which we run through Everbridge. Some people said, what was the failure? You didn't reach people. And we said, well, actually, that's a success because now we know who we can reach and who we can't reach. And so we felt very prepared. We had talked to our partner agencies. Again, my staff had thought through things, and we have systems in place as much as we actually have a server system that duplicates all of our city servers in Arizona in the event that things go down, there's an interruption to the cloud. So we've really taken disaster preparedness pretty far along. And then the Woolsey fire hit and everything went wrong all at once. And it was like a bad tabletop exercise coming to life. And so if you bear with me for a minute while I kind of tee up the week that we were having, we were under a PSPS watch from Southern California Edison. So we were on very high alert. On Monday of that week, my sheriff captain had a stroke, and we're a contract city with Los Angeles County. So sheriff and fire are provided through LA County. So I met his number 2 for the first time on Monday via phone call because she was new to the station, that he had been taken to the hospital. On Tuesday, we had not only a statewide election, but a local election where I had 2 council members who had been termed out, and I had 2 new council members elected, but not yet sworn in. We had a new sheriff in LA County who was under a race that hadn't been called. So it was a little bit of, we didn't know who was going to be the sheriff, and we had a new governor with Gavin Newsom who had been elected but not yet sworn in. And then on Wednesday evening, our community went through the Borderline Grill shooting, though it was in Thousand Oaks. For those people who are familiar with Southern California, that's just a hop and a skip from Malibu. And we had a lot of Pepperdine students. Pepperdine University is located adjacent to the city. It's actually in the county, but we consider it one of, part of our city family. And there were 16 students who were at the grill during the shooting, and 1 young woman who lost her life. And I had city staff members who had family and friends who were there. I had staff members who had been at the Las Vegas shooting, so this was very traumatic for them. So I started my day, early Thursday morning, consoling my staff. I was at Pepperdine University at a prayer service for the young woman who lost her life. And then later that afternoon, the Woolsey fire broke out, and we were the 3rd fire in California that day, behind the Camp Fire and the Hill Fire, which was also nearby Malibu. It was in the Thousand Oaks Camarillo area. And at first we were much more concerned about the threat of that fire because it was burning in an area that had previously burned over the hills into Malibu in years past. And so we were watching the Hill Fire. The Woolsey fire was, for those again familiar with Malibu, was northeast of Malibu, about 25 miles as the crow flies. Personally, I was worried because my house is between where the Woolsey fire started and Malibu. So my first concern was actually for my house. And so we got orders to evacuate that evening. So this is now Thursday evening at about midnight. And ultimately 250,000 people were evacuated during the Woolsey fire in less than 24 hours. So it was a tremendous evacuation effort by Los Angeles County. They were hearing what was going on with the Camp Fire, and they were very worried that lives would also be lost here. So their first concern was to protect life and then property. So at about midnight, when I got the evacuation order to evacuate my own home, our protocol in Malibu is if there's evacuation south of the 101, which was what was happening, then we fully activate our EOC. And so we started to activate our EOC, and my staff came in and started doing messaging and stepping everything up. And at about 7 a.m. on Friday morning, we got notice from the fire department that we needed to evacuate the entire city of Malibu. And so what was happening was there was a wall of fire about 14 miles long headed toward the coast. And we were dealing with, 70, 80 mile an hour winds. The fire front was actually they were holding the front in certain areas, but with the wind, the embers were driving those embers about 2 miles ahead of the front. And so that was where they really lost control. Unbeknownst to me at that time was that the LA County, who started to leave Ventura County, it started in Ventura County and moved to LA County, was begging for resources, and they kept putting in the mutual aid resource requests and not getting them. So they would be asking, for 500 engines and getting 50.
Wow.
And so, it was a terrible, just convergence of everything happening at once, where resources were already being sent to the Camp Fire, to the Hill Fire, and then we just weren't getting resources, which unfortunately ended up in the fact that we lost about 1,600 homes in the Woolsey fire burn area, about 500 of those in Malibu.
That's just devastating. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think one thing I wanted to ask you about that is that in this particular situation, I mean, you went into such great detail about how prepared you were, and then also all these other, non-related issues that would, take up the time and attention of public servants and city and county officials. And then you have this huge, fire. I mean, evacuating 250,000 people in an area, the entire city of Malibu. I think just taking those steps shows the scale and scope of the disaster you were dealing with. What I'd love for you to touch on is that, given that our report was based on the communication system failures and really the technical side, and talking about the nexus between the power grid and communication systems and networks, what challenges did you see? I think you shared with me there was just wide-scale infrastructure destruction.
Right. And so I kind of am teeing all this up because you think, okay, well, you're in your EOC, you're getting the information, you're sending out the messages, they're evacuating people, things are working the way they're supposed to in these horrible disasters. It's what we've trained for. It's what we've, tried to prepare a community for. What we didn't know was the wide scale power outages that were going on because of how fast the fire was moving. And so Southern California Edison lost about 2,000 power poles in this area. So that took out power completely. What it also took out is cell communications. And so what we didn't know sitting in our EOC was that we were sending out messages via the internet, via cell phones, calling people's homes. Most people have, phones through Wi-Fi or through internet, and people weren't getting the messages. So that was the first, problem that we learned about afterwards, that people just didn't necessarily get that evacuation notice in a timely manner. And then the other problem we had is in Malibu, we're 20 miles long, and our main road is Pacific Coast Highway, which is owned and operated by Caltrans. And there's multiple signals throughout that corridor. We were sending residents southeast towards Santa Monica to evacuate to avoid the Hill Fire, which was burning on the other side of our community. And there were so many power outages that all the signals along the highway were out, creating incredible traffic. I mean, it was just a complete gridlock. And so what would normally take someone 20 or 30 minutes was taking 6 hours. So you just had people queued up along the highway. Now, the good part of that is they were adjacent to the ocean. And so God forbid if something terrible happened, they actually had a place where they could be a safe haven. But that's not what you want during an evacuation. And so we were calling and asking CHP and the sheriff, please, open up all lanes of the highway, get us traffic control. And we were being told that was happening, but it wasn't, because they didn't have the resources to get to us. Again, because we were the third disaster going on in that day. So it really taxed our law enforcement and our public safety to a place that we had never anticipated. So looking back on those things, what can you do differently? What things can you have in place? How to communicate differently? So I always say, if you take nothing away but this one thing, is that you can always get in your car and listen to AM radio and find out what's going on. And I always say that to residents. If you have a power outage and you're worried, it's smoky, it's windy, you don't know what, you can't find it out, get in your car, because that will tell you what's going on. So it's a very good tip, is AM radio. And we have since provided many of our residents with hand cranked AM radios. But we've come up with additional systems to communicate with our community during a fire. So we're in the process of doing a project that would install a siren warning system, sort of like the old air raid systems.
Like the pole mounted ones.
Pole mounted in neighborhoods, old fashioned, analog. And so we're in the process of that, going through the design and planning of that. So that one.
Can I just interject here real quick? Because I really think this was, you were reading my mind on what the next question was going to be, is that, you know, the focus of our paper was that we live in this technology dependent society. And so everything that we expect is going to be received through our phones or through the internet. But as our study found, and it's hoping to really, you know, illuminate for folks, and your experience in Malibu speaks to this, is that there's such a nexus between the power, not just the power grid and the communications grid, because they share a lot of the same poles and fiber backhaul, et cetera, but the need for redundant communications. And in a lot of ways, it's these back to the future solutions that can be really, you know, the most effective in a situation where everything is knocked down, like in your case where you guys had to move your EOC, your Emergency Operations Center, to Santa Monica. So I'm sorry, I just wanted to interject to bring some context, but could you please continue to talk about, because I think that both on the community side and the resident side, that's what we're hoping to do, is provide information to folks on how to prepare, given that some of these long-term infrastructure solutions are going to take time and cost a lot of money.
Absolutely. I think that's a really very good point, is that you can't have enough redundant systems. I think that's, you know, what we really learned. So you have your reverse 911. What we did also immediately after the Woolsey fire is that we purchased the data for cell phone information for reverse 911. Most of the times when a municipality has that system, you just automatically get home phone numbers. And obviously today, many people don't have home phone numbers. So right away, we were able to purchase cell phone data, and we really encourage our residents to sign up and give us additional cell phone contact information. So if it's, you know, a couple, it's, you know, you have both the husband and the wife and the kids if they have phone numbers. So we really increase the numbers that we have in that. We also, and this had, we had actually enrolled in this immediately before the Woolsey fire, and we hadn't gotten trained to do it yet, but we also have our own ability to send out a WIA alert, which is the wireless emergency alert system. It's, most people know it for the Amber alerts that we get on our phone. The reason that's important for us is that we have a huge visitor population. We see about 15 million people coming into our community where we only have 13,000 residents. So we want to make sure that we have a way of communicating with visitors as well as our residents. We used it once since COVID broke out to communicate with people. And what that does is it just reaches another way of reaching people, particularly if they're not enrolled in communications to and from the city.
Navigating the recovery process after a fire is challenging, particularly with the additional issues caused by COVID-19. Fannie Mae is here to help. If you live in a FEMA-declared disaster area, you can request free assistance from our Disaster Response Network. Fannie Mae, in partnership with Mori Management International's Project Porchlight, launched the Disaster Response Network in 2018. This program uses HUD-approved counselors to offer support. These counselors have been specially trained as disaster coaches. They address the challenges homeowners and renters face when recovering from a disaster. There's no charge for their services. The goal of the Disaster Response Network is to help people return to pre-disaster normal as quickly as possible. Clients are matched with a coach who work with them one-on-one throughout their recovery. In the initial conversation with clients, coaches review the status of the homeowner's recovery process, including current challenges, decisions that need to be made, and immediate long-term goals. They discuss topics like income and expenses, insurance, housing, credit or debt challenges, as well as aid or other assistance programs that may be available. This may include FEMA applications and Small Business Administration or SBA loans. The coach helps the client plan and prioritize the next steps for their recovery. Moving forward, the coach continues to be there for the client, reaching out to them regularly, at least monthly, but more often when needed, for up to 18 months' time. These regular check-ins provide the client the opportunity to ask questions, get help tackling challenges, and keep things moving as they work through their recovery. It's also where coaches can help identify new recovery assistance or grants that have become available, strategize new next steps for recovery, and talk through difficult decisions or priorities. One of the key ways coaches assist disaster response network clients is by helping intervene when something has gone awry. Coaches will, with the clients on the line, call insurance companies to adjust their claims when costs exceed initial estimates, or call the client's creditors to request payment relief. The Disaster Response Network's approach ensures survivors have a personal financial expert working with them throughout their recovery. By helping minimize the financial impact of a disaster, survivors can recover more quickly. To get confidential disaster relief assistance, call the Disaster Response Network at 877-833-1746. Once again, that is 877-833-1746. Or visit knowyouroptions.com/relief for more information.
Can I ask you a question, or wanted to underscore a point for folks, is that hopefully by now most cities and counties and other potential alerting authorities are aware of wireless emergency alerts that go through to cell phones, and that's part of the IPAWS, the federal government's integrated public alert and warning system. And that also is, you raise a really good point about some of the areas in California that are most threatened by disasters, and how you have the local government and private sector programs which are opt-in, where the individuals, the residents or the citizens opt into that. When you use WIA through IPAWS, it's the alerting authority, the government agency, that needs to opt in to use the system. But then in doing so, you have this more robust geofencing capability, so that you can it doesn't have to be someone who has signed up for information through your municipality. You just have the ability to alert them, and that makes a huge difference. And we've heard that from your peers in Sonoma and Lake County and other places as well.
Right, and the counties typically are the ones who use that system. Again, that's reliant on a cell phone. So you again are reliant on power. So what we're trying to do is come up with multiple ways of communicating that are both reliant on power and are not reliant on power. Some of the other things that happened in our disaster post-fire was that we had quite a few residents who remained in the evacuation area. And so they were there without power, without any way of hearing what was going on after the fire. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a system, if we had residents, whether it was a fire where they remained to stay or an earthquake where there was no power and people were all there, of how are we going to give them up-to-date information. So we came up with a very simple solution where we actually print out material and put it on either a sandwich board or a poster board and put it around town based on kind of gathering areas, whether it might be a fire station or a school or a church or a supermarket. And we actually use this, and we've been using it during COVID, where we're putting printed out updates every day on our supermarket windows, where people can go if they don't have power or maybe they're not internet savvy, and they can see what the city is doing and what the latest information is. And we actually have been using our CERT volunteers to do that task. So that's another thing too, is that, people get tired. You only have so many staff. It doesn't matter how big a city you are, things happen and people aren't able to. So I really encourage people to take advantage of their community and their volunteer groups to help them with certain things. So that was a main solution that we came up with.
And we can just say for some of the people who would be watching this, CERT is the Community Emergency Response Teams, right? And
yes, thank you. Sorry, government speak is all acronyms, and I apologize. I sometimes forget.
Oh, no, but you know, obviously that after speaking to a number of stakeholders who've been through these disasters like yourself, you know, there's a common theme that's coming, that it's like you've got to prepare on the technical side and diversify and build, you know, redundant, you know, technological solutions. But the flip side is also in these sort of black sky events when everything fails. You know, you mentioned earlier the hand crank radios that can get radio signals through, you know, AM radio and the National, you know, Weather Association, and just the more analog, like the printed material, the sandwich boards. As crazy as that might seem in our, you know, this point in time where technology is so advanced and evolved, but that's what we've heard a number of people doing, and it's so important that you're stressing that.
Right, absolutely. You know, and you want to make sure too, and it's something we did after the Woolsey fire, is really increase the number of people in our CERT team, the Community Emergency Response Team, because those people know their neighbors and they know their neighborhoods, and they, you know, even with a small amount of training, can be a huge resource to connect with people. We unfortunately suffered flood after fire immediately post Woolsey, and went through another round of about 4 series of evacuations. And so we used our CERT members to go door to door to make sure that their neighborhood and their neighbors knew there's a large rain event coming, be prepared, you know, keep your phone charged, be ready to go, ready, set, go. And they were wonderful because they know the people. So you're going to open the door to your neighbor where you may not to a stranger from the city coming by. I wanted to also share the other thing that we have implemented, and it sounds very simple, and it actually is, but we were really worried that we would get put in the exact same situation where we didn't have resources. We had always assumed in evacuations, if power went out, that we would use sheriff deputies to drive through our neighborhoods to evacuate people. And because of the number of people being evacuated at the same time, you know, there just wasn't the ability to get that many law enforcement officers in the neighborhoods at the same time. And so the city purchased about 50 bullhorns, and we made magnets for all of our city cars that say disaster response. And we've trained and we've done drills of this where I put 2 city staff people in a car, one's driving, one's using a bullhorn, they have a siren and a microphone, and they drive through the neighborhoods and saying, time to evacuate, you know, and it actually works pretty well. So we did it so we could see. And so it's just one more tool that we have. I hope I never have to do that. But, you know, if we get put in a situation where we don't have enough resources to do evacuations, my staff can actually step up and do it.
And I think that's, thank you so much for sharing those, because those are, again, when you look at the need for redundant communications, and not just analog, it's like, how do you, you know, leverage your existing infrastructure as a city or a county, and deploying, you know, public safety vehicles, getting the bullhorns, even sending just slight different, you know, audio or visual signals, like with your magnets, or ways that you can alert your citizens that there's something different, and it's, you know, that you've got to pay attention and look for further information about.
Right, and that's a low cost thing that you can do. Obviously, the siren warning system is a very expensive and long-term solution, but we wanted to make sure that we had tools right now today that if we needed them. Last week, I actually had 4 small fires break out, so we're not, you know, not out of the clear ever here. You know, so there's just a lot of things that you can think about and do to make things safer. The other thing I wanted to touch on that you mentioned briefly was that we had to evacuate our EOC because our city hall was in the path of the fire. And so, I never thought I would need to use the lessons learned there so quickly here in the pandemic. But we were able to run our EOC completely remotely, which we were really in good shape when this pandemic hit, because my staff was already doing that a year ago, and so they were able quickly to transition to that. So I know most small cities now are working remotely, but it's just another thing, which is how do you work if what you thought was going to be the place. You were all going to be in this room together, and this is how it's going to work. Now, how do you work and do it quickly? You have to turn on a dime. It's not like the fire is going to pause while you try to figure this out, or the earthquake. So it's just another important thing for people to keep in mind, that you might not be physically where you thought you were going to be running things while there's a disaster going on.
And I think that's so important. One of the things that I'd like to kind of pivot as we come a little bit to the end of our interview is that what our paper, found and was making the case is that California is facing this new normal where there's this series of factors that are contributing just to the inevitability that not only are we going to have more disasters, but they're going to be bigger, they're going to extend for longer periods of time. They may include power shutoffs. They can compromise, communications networks. And now with this pandemic, when you and I first spoke, that was a couple months ago, and it seemed like the coronavirus pandemic, there was an end in sight to that. But now that we're not, we're looking at these, the potential of concurrent disasters, one on top of the other. And so I wanted to have you close with us, is that you were really specific and clear about how people should be thinking about problems and public safety and emergency response right now. I think, you said we need to think big. Can you kind of share with us your thoughts on that and give a parting shout out to your fellow municipalities?
Sure. I think that this pandemic has been a big learning lesson for a lot of us of how can government work differently. I think we've all done an amazing job of showing, that we can all telecommute and do the things we need to do for the most part remotely, and to continue to think of what that would look like in an earthquake or in a bad fire. I think it's also been a big learning lesson for us of the need to have redundancy within your own staff, and that there may not be help at the end of a phone line, where in the past, if it's a fire just hitting me, I can call Northern California and ask for help from other cities, or go through the mutual aid system. And in a major disaster or in a major pandemic like we're in now, we're all kind of on our own. And so making sure that you've cross-trained people, that you have different ways of thinking things through is really important. And I did want to just touch on one other item, which I didn't say, because this is certainly about fire and wildfire, preparing for that, is the importance to make sure that your community knows about home hardening and providing tools to harden your home in your neighborhood, and make sure you have a fire safe home, because as you said, these fires aren't going away and they're going to get worse. And so we have a lot of tools and a lot of resources on our website, and I encourage people to look at that. We've gotten so far as to adopt a landscape ordinance that's a fire resistant landscape ordinance to help residents. And so that's just another component of it. And there's not one perfect solution to any of this, but it's a collection of a lot of different tools that can help make us safer, make us more resilient, and hopefully avoid any catastrophes and loss of life.
Got it. Well, thank you so much for that. We have just been speaking to Reva Feldman, City Manager of Malibu. Really, I think that the work that you're doing there to keep your residents safe is both important for your residents, but your willingness to share your wisdom gained through experience with others is critically important. And we just want to thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for including me, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on How to Disaster, a playbook to recover, rebuild, and reimagine. I want to leave you with this one thought. Thank you for spending your time with us. And we want you to know that you can get through this. You can recover, rebuild, and reimagine. But there's only one way you're going to do it, and that's together.